Hello and welcome to Cinema Savvy, and this is it. This is the finale of Game of Thrones. This is our final ever, well, I'm not going to say final ever discussion on Game of Thrones. As we know, there's been a couple of 5 prequel series announced, and I guarantee this won't be the end of that we see of Game of Thrones. But for right now, this is the end of Game of Thrones, Season 8 finale. Season 8, Episode 6, The Iron Throne. This is what, after 8 years, everything has been building to. As you can see, once again, unfortunately, no Tate on this one. We were meant to go live yesterday, but Tate said he couldn't make it, and he thought that he could make it today, so we delayed it as long as we could. But I got a phone call about an hour ago saying that he couldn't make it tonight, unfortunately. But he has said he does want to jump on a video going over a kind of retrospective of Game of Thrones in general, a discussion on all 8 seasons and his thoughts on the last couple of episodes, because he hasn't been able to voice his opinions, which I think differ greatly to mine. He's gone very quiet on the finale, actually. I haven't heard his full thoughts on it, so I'll be very interested to see that video. Apparently I've got camera problems and I'm zoomed in. I don't know why. I don't know what's going on with it, so we might have to just power through, because I don't want to mess with anything now in case it's going to mess anything up for the stream. I've got this on standby. This is my gentleman's jack, and I guess I'm going to begin, and this isn't going to be like a drunk commentary or anything like that, because honestly, I'm not even angry. I'm not even mad, because we knew it was coming. You know, like I think it got leaked, actually. I think the finale got leaked through a bunch of plot points throughout Season 8 got leaked. I did read the leak ahead of Episode 5, just before the finale, just because to me, like, the damage was done on Episode 3, but Episode 4, the first half, clawed its way back up a little bit, but 5, for me, it was dead in the water. It was dead and buried, so I didn't care about getting spoiled. I read the leaks just in case they did come true, and guess what? They came true. So a toast to Season 8 of Game of Thrones. Long may it reign. Oh, that is not good, but also on hand as well, I've got my trusty water to wash down horrible tasting alcohol. I don't even know if we've got a lot to discuss on today's show, in all honesty. Like, I've got the usual plan. I've got the usual bullet points. I'm going to, as always, for anyone who's, new, just tuning in right now, this is our weekly show where we comb through everything in the episode, give our thoughts, speculation. Although we won't have any speculation now, I guess the speculation will come into where we think the future of Game of Thrones is going to be. Is there any possible for a sequel series and things like that? All of these things and more I'm going to talk about. We've got people in the comments now. We've got Seaworld Man, we've got JXE, we've got Sheila. Hey to everyone, by the way. Yeah, apparently my camera's really zoomed in, so maybe if I back up on you all like this a little bit, maybe that's going to be slightly better. I don't know. We've got Claudia as well. We've got loads of people in. We're all here for the finale discussion. And that also goes to you at home. Like, I'm going to be running my mouth for like the next hour, probably hour and a half. I don't know how long I'm going to talk on this thing. I'm just going to go off the cuff. We've got alcohol. We've got fellow Game of Thrones fans, or should I say former Game of Thrones fans now. This is going to be good. So please also get commenting as well. We've got Anais. Good to see you too. Let's get some conversation going. By the way, I've already posed a question to you guys. Tell me some of your fondest Game of Thrones memories, because there's going to be a lot of negative stuff in this live stream, and I want to bring some positivity into it as well. I swear the alcohol's not already kicking in. Positivity into the discussion. So tell me some of your favorite Game of Thrones moments from all 8 seasons. Does anyone actually have a favorite moment from Season 8? I'll be very interested to hear if you do. So, I did this last week because, as I say, like, I'm on my own today. So I am going to be looking at the chat. So if, my commentary and my ruminations on this episode does go a little bit flat, it's because I'm reading your comments, and I do want to get to any of your questions you might have, or any of your thoughts as well, because you guys raised some really good points. I'm just going to give a quick once over. We've got Brinsley. We have got a full house tonight. We have a small council of our own going on right now, and this is awesome. Brinsley said, did someone say booze? Yes. If you've got a drink, I'm not going to endorse drinking, by the way. But if you've got a beverage on hand, grab a drinking horn, grab a mead jug or anything like that, and let's get into it. JXE says, did you see that theory I sent you? Yes, I did, and I'll be reading that out towards the end of the episode, or maybe actually when I get to it, if you can copy paste that into here, I'll read that, although I know the basics of your theory there. We've got Shrek. Wow, I am honored by one of my favorite animated characters of all time. Some people laugh, some people cry, some say, what? Some Night King was built up for 8 seasons to die. Oh, some say the Night King was built up for 8 seasons to die. Yep, and you can find our full discussion on that on our episode 3, the long night discussion. I had many thoughts on that, and I'm sure that'll be coming up when I get into my wrap-up. But that's the intro. Let's get into this episode, and let's tear this episode a new asshole, because boy, does it deserve to be. So as you can tell right off the bat, I didn't like this episode. And was this episode better than episode 5? Probably. I think 5 shocked me more than anything, in a bad way. Like, 5 just kind of repeatedly hit you over the head with all of these dead-end story arcs and, ruining one of my favorite characters, which was Jaime Lannister and Cersei as well. And just the sheer slaughter and massacre that I was not expecting and was totally not earned for Daenerys. So I think overall I have more problems with episode 5, but I mean 5 is the interlude into this episode, right? Like, that is teeing you off for this episode. And when you've seen the shitstorm that was episode 5, and even some may argue episode 4 and episode 3 as well, you know that the finale is going to be a doozy. Also, the fact that the finale is written and directed by David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, who, I guess they just kind of forgot how to write. Because this isn't good. This really, really isn't good. There isn't even that much to talk about. Like, I've gone onto the episode on Wikipedia now, usually a little bit behind the scenes. I have my live stream up here on Google Hangouts, and I do like a little bullet point checklist of all the points of the episode. If you go to the plot on Wikipedia, the Iron Throne, it's like 4 short paragraphs. It is tiny. And that's what this episode feels like. It feels like this whole series, in fact, even down to the goddamn intro of the episodes, where now it's just 2 locations, it feels so small. Like the broad, expansive characters and lands and geography and far-reaching political, like, someone will make a political choice and this will have ramifications for every corner of the realm. We don't get that now. It is pretty much just Winterfell and King's Landing, but we know that. So this episode picks up literally like seconds after the ending of episode 5. I don't know if I mentioned, by the way, I'm getting over a cold, so I might sound a little bit bunged up, so apologies for that. And hopefully my voice doesn't give out midway through this thing, but we're going to keep on trucking. So we open the episode with actually, and again, cinematography-wise and how this episode looks, with one exception towards the end of the episode, and I'll get into that. It looks great. Like, there are some fantastic shots in this. This episode actually has one of my favorite shots in maybe all 8 seasons of Game of Thrones. The CGI is on point. The sets, for the most part, look great. We have Tyrion surveying the destruction of King's Landing. And actually, the first half of this episode is a very, very slow burn. It's just a lot of people walking in a kind of dazed stupor around. Maybe they're just, clearly they're just as shocked as the viewers were at what Daenerys did last episode. And I actually thought it was quite a moody opening to the episode. We knew that was probably how it was going to open anyway. You do get some pretty haunting shots as well of like that one guy who's just been like horrifically burned and scarred, and he's just like sort of walking in a daze, almost like a zombie, just past them. Random guy, we don't know who he is, random civilian, one straggler left, walking past. I thought that was very effective and actually very chilling, in that no one really drew attention to it. No one like tried to stop him or talk to him. He just carries on walking. I thought that was quite effective. So there are a few positives as we get into this episode. So let's carry on moving here. It honestly is such a very simplistic episode. This is a question I'm going to throw out to everyone. We see King's Landing from a distance, like the main, the building, the main throne room. Did it look slightly more rebuilt this episode than its fate in the last episode? Like, I was under the impression that thing was razed to the ground. Now, I'm not saying it isn't ruined. Like, I'm not saying it's not in ruin and is devastated, but like, the building was still there. Like, I thought the roof came down. I thought that whole thing razed to the ground. but it kind of looked slightly more substantial and structurally sound this episode. I don't know if anyone else had that. That was just an observation I had. And actually, this takes me to, and God bless, like, Peter Dinklage, man, and all the actors in this, really, like, you can see them, and this episode, more than any, broke my damn heart. Like, I've watched those videos you can find on YouTube where, it's the actors saying how much they hate, not directly, although some of them, I think, actually were pretty direct with their thoughts, their dislike for Season 8 and how they were let down by it. I think if you type in, like, Game of Thrones Season 8 cast 3 minutes review or something like that, you'll find it. It's a 3-minute video, and you've got like Emilia Clarke, and there's like an interviewer at a press junket saying like, what do you think to Season 8 or the finale? And she's just like, best season ever. And then it cuts to Kit Harington, and someone asks him like, if you can describe in one word the finale of Game of Thrones, what would it be? And he says disappointing. You can clearly see that a lot of these actors are just really dismayed at the ending they got and the material they had to work with. Even Peter Dinklage, he knows his character. He's been playing this character for 8 years, and, for God's sake, he won an Emmy on the show. He's one of the best actors in the show, and for a lot of time, he was a lot of people's favorite character. And he knows that it's a shit show. And you can tell every actor in this episode knows that they're just working with absolute shit, and they're really trying here. They're really trying to make the best of an awful script and an awful wrap up to the story. And nothing is more evident than this scene here, where we have Tyrion walking into King's Landing, going to the rubble, going to the meeting place, or towards the exit of where he instructed his brother to take Cersei and to escape. And conveniently, Jaime Lannister's metal hand, his golden hand, is atop the rubble, despite getting caved in by rubble. Like, he would be buried under that thing, like the entire roof. Imagine how much stone and everything would be falling from that ceiling on top of them. There isn't going to be any golden hand conveniently poking out for Tyrion to easily find him. And there's going to be loads of these little coincidences in this episode all the way throughout, which is just such lazy writing. So Tyrion starts digging and, trying to get to his brother, and then you find like the most unscathed bodies of Jaime and Cersei Lannister perfectly like wrapped in each other's arms. Now, I know Game of Thrones is a very violent show, and by God, they haven't shied away from violence before. Can you imagine what 2 bodies would look like under like tons and tons of rubble cascading on them? There wouldn't be anything left. You wouldn't even be able to like identify them from fucking dental records. There would be nothing. But these just look like they haven't been touched. And there's already been a meme and a picture come out of this, which is amazing. When it cuts to Tyrion's, the angle where the camera's focusing on Tyrion, just behind him, there's a completely flat bit with no rubble underneath them. Now, when we watched the end of the last episode, we saw these, these plumes of concrete, these like plumes of stone, like cascading down, like the entire thing was coming down. Now it looks like it's come down in very neat little piles of earth. And literally, if Jaime and Cersei had have stood like a couple of inches to the, to the right, they would still be alive, because the rubble clearly didn't fall on that part. I don't know if any guys picked up on that, but, it's a really great performance. Peter Dinklage is trying, he's like in utter dismay and just, anger and frustration and sorrow, and he's like pounding his fists and he's like picking up rocks and slamming them on the side of this stone. It's a great performance, but by God, his character is just given nothing. And that kind of takes us to the first half of the episode. I'm going to talk about something else here now. I'm going to cut over to the chat real quick. I'm going to grab some water here. So let me catch up on some of you guys' comments. Sorry, I'm being comment moderator and host and, everything like that. So apologies if this is stop and start. Claudia says, I'm going way back to the comments. Why do we have alcohol? Because I'm mourning Game of Thrones. I'm mourning the fact that I have fallen out of love with a story. And that's the saddest thing that can ever happen. You're not angry. You might be slightly bitter, but you're just sad that, under any other circumstances, moments of these episodes, under different circumstances, could have had so much more power and poignancy to them. But with the terrible writing, it's ruined Game of Thrones. To the point where now, if like there was a newcomer saying like, oh, I've heard great things about this Game of Thrones thing, would you recommend it? And I'm like this with a lot of TV shows now. If the ending's terrible and it amounts to nothing, no. Like, no, I won't recommend it if the ending's like, no matter how good the destination is. I'm sorry, no matter how good the journey is, if the destination is lackluster or doesn't wrap everything up or is severely underwhelming or is just a shadow of its former self, then no, I won't recommend it. Lost was one of my favorite TV shows, and look how that ended up. If someone said, would you recommend Lost? I'd say, well, I like it, but don't get your hopes up for the ending, and that usually turns a lot of people off. So it's just the way TV shows go, unfortunately, for the most part. Let's just have a look. Sorry, I'm just reading more of your comments here. So I asked you to like type some of your favorite moments. Claudia says Brienne's knighthood was my favorite. I'll agree with that. That was a very nice moment. Unfortunately, now in the shadow of where they took Jaime Lannister's character, kind of like a really horrible, sadistic moment of Jaime. Really, when we look back. Let's have a look. Sorry, this is stop and start. They combined Dany with Lady Stoneheart. For context, Lady Stoneheart, and actually, you know what? I'm not going to explain who Lady Stoneheart is because that might ruin the books for someone. And actually now, although we're still waiting on book 6 and book 7, and hell, A Dream of Spring probably will be a dream. We might not even get these last 2 books. If someone said, would you recommend Game of Thrones? I'd say no, but go ahead and read the books. You know, by the time you've read all the books, hopefully book 6 might be out. You'll get a lot more enjoyment out of it, and it actually might be shaping up to be a good ending, at least, hopefully. And here's the thing, like, people have been saying, you know, George R.R. Martin many seasons ago gave D&D cliff notes as to where he wanted the story to go, where he envisioned it going, where he wanted all the characters to end, who was on the throne, etc. And everything that happened in this season might still happen in the books. Obviously, there's going to be some differences because, you know, the snowball effect of changing things earlier seasons has kind of turned Game of Thrones into its very own fan fiction at this point. But let's say he has moments where Daenerys goes completely insane and goes crazy. That might still happen in the books, but I guarantee it will be developed a lot better than it was in this show. And, you know, all the other fallout of when we get to the ending of this episode, I'm sure it's going to be handled a hell of a lot better when we get to the books, hopefully. JXC says, Claudia, the episode basically ended in the first half hour. Yeah, kind of, your main stuff. Then it kind of goes on to like an extended epilogue. Reminded me very much of Return of the King, by the way, the Lord of the Rings. And oh boy, will I get to the Lord of the Rings comparisons towards the end of this episode. Claudia says, I didn't think the CGI was on point when Drogon melted the throne. I actually didn't have a problem with the visual effects in that scene. I thought the special effects, I think the music by Ramin Djawadi and the special effects, by far the most consistent things this entire season. Let's have a look. Boy, there's a lot of comments here. I promise to try and go back and read some of the comments, but we're going to keep it moving now because there's a lot to talk about. And honestly, like, I could just sit and read your guys' comments all the time. Okay, so here's another thing. So the next scene we cut to is Jon Snow confronting Grey Worm, who is stood there with a bunch of the Unsullied, and they're slaughtering Lannister soldiers. They're executing Lannister soldiers who are the survivors of the attack on King's Landing. Slitting their throats completely unmercilessly, and Jon's like, hey, why are you doing this thing? And get used to Jon Snow being a complete useless tool this whole episode. Like, Jon Snow knows nothing, Jon Snow does nothing. He is just a laughable character this entire season. Utter wasted potential of his character. And Grey Worm basically says that, you know, I've been given direct instructions from the Queen to execute all of her enemies, including the prisoners. And Jon Snow's like, stop doing that. And Grey Worm's like, well, then that's treason. And then Jon Snow goes, okay, no, that's fine. Crack on, that's fine. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, if I missed a scene here, but Jon Snow says like he's going to go and speak to Daenerys, and he walks straight past Grey Worm and up some stairs, and you're thinking, right, Grey Worm's here at the foot of the stairs. He's going to walk to the top of the stairs, and Daenerys is going to be there. But I swear, we cut to another scene, and we cut back, and then Jon Snow's walking across this courtyard with hordes of Unsullied and Dothraki. Where these numbers increase from, I have no idea, because I was under the impression that as of episode 3, all of the Dothraki were systematically murdered by the White Walkers. Apparently not, because, we saw a lot of them last episode. Now there seems like there's even more than ever. And you've also got, like, factions of Unsullied posted out here. She seems to have more troops than ever. So they are really not consistent with these numbers, and it's just laughable. Like, they've just thrown continuity out the window. It just seems like they wanted to rush this thing out, get it done, and they really didn't care about any kind of consistency between episodes. And then we follow Jon, and he's in the courtyard with Arya, and he, like, pushes past the crowd, and he walks up the stairs, and Grey Worm's there in front of him again. So it's like they repeated the same thing, like Jon Snow approaching Grey Worm, continuing on to talk to Daenerys. We then cut back. He's still on the way to approach Daenerys, but then Grey Worm's in front of him again. Do you know what I mean? Did anyone else have that? He was almost like a checkpoint character. Like, he kept reappearing. It was weird. I don't know if anyone else caught that. So Claudia says that Grey Worm is super fast. And yes, it was a blunder. Thank you. Someone else pointed it out. It's just laughably bad. It's so bad. So the shot that I was talking about, one of my favorite shots, is where Jon Snow's ascending the staircase. Sorry, my throat's really bad. And Daenerys is walking out, and we have Drogon unfurl its wings behind her. She's almost like a vampire walking out, and I actually thought that was a great shot. I know a lot of people have actually been really negative on that shot, and yes, it is on the nose, and yes, it's about as subtle as a sledgehammer to the face. But it was a cool shot, like Mother of Dragons, like that imagery. Like, I'm cool with that. It's fine. So it's around about this point that Daenerys just kind of turns into Adolf Hitler. And, she's giving these speeches that, we're going to conquer the world. First King's Landing, then the world. And this is laughable too, because she kind of echoes the speech that she had. I think it was Khal Drogo's speech, wasn't it, in season 1, where he says, like, we're going to ransack their city, we're going to kill all of them in their iron suits, we're going to rape and murder and pillage and all of this good stuff. So she kind of echoes that, but she kind of goes on this megalomaniacal rampage of wanting to just, extinguish the world, essentially, break the wheel, as she keeps putting it, which I think she's misunderstood the term and the meaning behind that break the wheel of what she originally set out to do. So right now, Daenerys is just evil bad guy. She's a Bond villain. She is Hitler in this episode. So if you thought that switch was quick, you're not going to get any kind of explanation in this one. She kind of offhandedly mentions later in the episode that she did what she did because Cersei used compassion, her compassion against her for people. She put the people in front of her, and I'm like, she really didn't. Like, she was stood on that wall with scorpions pointed directly at you. You had a dragon. You could have ended it there and then if you wanted to. And she did end it. The city was won. It was done. It was fine. And she still chose to go ahead and lay waste to every single person in the city. I just don't buy that. It was a lazy excuse. If it was an excuse as any, it was a terrible one. And I didn't buy that at all. So how much more evidence does Jon Snow need here, right? So she goes on this rampage saying, we're going to go from Dawn to the Iron Islands. We're going to do this. We're going to do that from Winterfell to Slaver's Bay or something like that. Now, I still think that some of the Northmen, some of the troops that were behind Jon Snow that were also murdering everyone left, right, and center, they're still alive. And they're still technically part of Daenerys' cause here, right? So when she says that she's going to ruin Winterfell and she's going to burn Winterfell to the ground, like the capital of the North, why are they all cool with this? Why doesn't Jon Snow in that moment, if sacking an entire city and massacring a whole city of women and children wasn't already enough proof for him, the fact that she said that she is going to lay waste to his ancestral home, and Arya's there too, and Jon Snow just keeps saying, she's our queen, she's our queen. Like, how dumb is this character? How dumb have they made Jon Snow? He is completely beyond redemption at this point. It's idiotic, and it's not just him, it's everyone. It's Tyrion. In the very next moment, Tyrion comes out and publicly throws in the towel. He abdicates the responsibility of Hand. And, he takes off the pin and throws it down the stairs. He doesn't want anything to do with her. In front of everyone. Like, this is a character who has been so smart and methodical for the most part up until this point, up until season 8 at least. You know, he will feign an alliance with someone. He will, you know, like he will kill his father with a crossbow. He will strangle his lover with a, you know, a necklace because she crossed him. He would find a way. Like, he can read people. He would cozy up to her even if he had to, just like Littlefinger and Varys did on the Small Council all those years in the early seasons. They wouldn't have any love for the monarch, but they would cozy up to them because they knew that it would be instant death if they, you know, pledged unfealty or they committed treason. Tyrion does it here. You could argue that he's got nothing left to lose. You know, King's Landing's gone. His home's been burnt to the ground. His brother and sister are dead. He's got no family left now. He's hedged his bets on a dictator and an absolute just mass murderer. He's got nothing left to live for. So he's like, you know what? If you want to kill me, kill me. You've killed everyone else. Like, that's fine. So you could argue it in that way, perhaps. But I think that's not giving enough credit to Tyrion, because right after that, when Tyrion's in prison, and also how is Tyrion just imprisoned? When they've been killing everyone that has spoken out against Daenerys, you know, slaughtering Lannister prisoners in the street. There you've got the hand of the king, who, I swear to God, Tyrion has made so many mistakes when he's like been under Daenerys' rule. Like, he's been advising her and he's been making some pretty shitty decisions up until this point. And, you know, I think she's actually been really lenient with him. It seems like she's given the old spiel of, you know, fail me again and I'll kill you. I think she's given that speech about 3 or 4 times this entire season, and it's only 6 episodes long. So why doesn't she kill him here? Like, he's outright, you know, saying that he doesn't support her as queen. Like, someone could just throw a spear and just kill him on the spot right there. But no, because everyone has plot armor in this episode. He is taken prisoner. And that's it. I'm going to take another drink of water right now. Oh, I feel like I'm doing like chapters in this. It's almost like a little storybook, a storybook of hate and disappointment. A Song of Ice and Fire in a nutshell, I think. So I'm going to go back and read some of you guys' comments. Sheila just says, I've got to go. Have a good evening, everyone. Thanks for tuning in, Sheila. And I promise to talk about you, talk about this episode with you in full as soon as I can. If I'm not all talked out about Game of Thrones after this stream. Oh boy, there's a lot of comments here. Jesus, that's great though. It's great that so many people are tuning in. This is good. Get the conversation going between you guys. Like, all of you are talking amongst each other. This is awesome. Talk about Game of Thrones, your happiness, your frustration. Brinsley says, say what you really think, Chris. Oh boy, I am. And who knows? You know what? I'm going to take another shot of this because this will help. This will help the thoughts flow more. Perhaps. Claudia says, plot armor in this episode is the understatement of the last 6 weeks. That is very true. Ah, God. Ooh. Okay, let's have a look at some more. Multiple Man 78 says, the shot that I referred to with Daenerys with Drogon's wings unfurling behind her, that shot was fantastic. Daenerys said, I'm Batman. I thought that too. I thought that was a great moment. JXE says, why does no one mention the fact the city was surrendered? Also, I know you won't recommend the show, but what about those movies? What JXE is referring to is there's been some fan edits made of Game of Thrones of season 1 and I believe it's season 2. And they've basically just condensed the first season of Game of Thrones, all 10 episodes, into like a 2.5-hour movie. And they've replaced all the soundtrack with Game of Thrones music. It's not half bad, but it does miss out quite a considerable amount. Let's have a look at what we've got. Multiple Man says, although I thought the best shot in the episode was of the twins lying dead beside Tyrion, from womb to tomb together, gorgeous imagery. I didn't even think of that, but you're absolutely right. You know, in terms of imagery, that's great. But I'm just talking about, in reality, if a whole ceiling, a whole stone castle comes crashing down on you, you ain't going to be in any kind of gorgeous imagery. Believe me, you're going to be in pure gore, not gorgeous imagery. And that was a terrible pun. And that's probably as aid of the whiskey. And with that, I'm going to continue moving on. We've got more people in the comments. Elizabeth just tuned in. She's put, hello, dare I listen? please listen, because this is going to be an absolute trip. We're not even halfway through this episode yet. We're getting into the good stuff now. So keep the conversation going, because, you know, I do, when I get to the end of this stream, I do kind of want to end it on some shred of a positive note. I think Brinsley has asked about my thoughts on the Lord of the Rings series as well. I'll be talking about that once I get to my epilogue and my wrap-up and where I think that Game of Thrones is going to head after this. Right, so where did we leave off? Okay, so we have Daenerys being Hitler, blah, blah, blah. Jon really knows nothing. Okay, so here we go. So Jon goes to talk to Tyrion. Now, again, we've talked about how the passage of time in Game of Thrones, which kind of started around Game of Thrones season 7, in all honesty, where things would just happen. People would just appear. There seemed to be no sense of geographical distance travel or passage of time or anything like that. Now, I was under the impression that everything that transpires in this episode happens in like a day or like a day and a half or something like that. Did anyone notice people's beards growing longer in this episode? Or was that just me? Like, Tyrion's imprisoned, and then when Jon Snow goes to confront him and talk to him in the jail cell, I swear we see Tyrion with like this huge, bedraggled sort of like hobo beard, like he's been imprisoned for months and months. And that's really not the case, because it was literally like the day after, wasn't it? Or later that day. Claudia says, yes, some weeks had passed. I guess that's just like the problem of condensing everything down into one episode. You really don't get that sense of time being passed. When an episode ended in like Game of Thrones season 1, and then you came back next week, that time between episodes did give you the illusion, or even if you're marathoning it and you hit the credits each episode, that gives you the illusion of time, that there has been a considerable passage of time that has gone by between episodes. But you don't get anything in this. Brinsley says he looked gaunt too. Yeah, he did. He looked thin. He looked emaciated. He looked really bedraggled, which looks like he'd been there, you know, as Claudia says, you know, for some weeks, which doesn't make any sense. And that's another point of this season being completely rushed. I believe it's been announced now. It came out that they were offered 10 seasons, and D&D said, we don't want 10 seasons. We can do this in 8. And they cut down season 7 and 8 in terms of total number of episodes. Makes no sense to me. Whether their hearts were still in it, well, I think it's evident to see that their hearts weren't in it. The fact that not only was a Starbucks cup left in an episode, but in the same season, within a span of like 3 episodes, we have a plastic water bottle left in an episode as well. You know what I mean? It's just absolutely laughable. And some people are speculating that it's because they've got the gig for Star Wars now, but I thought they hadn't got the gig for Star Wars until after season 7 had come out. And for me, the damage was already being done with Game of Thrones way back in season 7. So to me, this is just an extension. This is season 7 ramped up to 10, ramped up to 11, sorry. If you thought season 7 was stupid, oh boy, howdy, you haven't seen anything when you get to season 8. So here's another thing. So, and this is going to contradict a decision that Tyrion has towards the end of the episode here. Jon still, he knows nothing and he does nothing. He is still defending Daenerys here, even though Tyrion is throwing every piece of evidence he has at Jon right now. He's saying that, you know, you can stack the amount of bodies that, you know, Jaime or Cersei or anyone else has accumulated over the years, but they will not compare to the amount of numbers that were killed by Daenerys' attack on King's Landing. And he's still defending her and saying, but Cersei was bad. It's like I'm shouting at the screen. Like I am actively shouting at the screen in frustration at Jon Snow's character. And, you know, it's not Kit Harington's fault. It's not, it's no one's fault other than the writers who just stopped giving a shit. And like, we're going to talk about like just dead plot arcs and story arcs that just dropped off a fucking cliff. Why was Jon Snow resurrected? You know, Azor Ahai reborn, the Lord of Light, the prince who was promised, all of this, you know, resurrected at the end of season 5. For what? What did he do? He shouted at a dragon. He didn't pet his dog, and then he pet his dog, and he killed a tyrant. Is that it? Like, okay, Jon's a secret Targaryen. So what? That didn't amount to anything. Nothing was... It's so frustrating. And watching him in this still defend Daenerys, it's just... I could have just walked out then. I could have just shut off the fucking episode then. But if I'd have done that, I wouldn't have been treated to the absolute amazing finale that we had at the end of this episode. So he's still defending Daenerys. And Tyrion here, and this is very interesting to note because I'm going to bring this up towards the end of the episode where it's completely contradicted. He is still arguing for Jon Snow to take the throne here. He is saying, you have the claim. Varys was right. No shit. You have the claim. You're a Targaryen. You're a good man. He's a good man that does nothing, apparently, though. But he is still arguing for him to take the throne, saying, like, look, you've got to step up, boy. Like, if you haven't stepped up before this point, if you're going to be like Aragorn and not want the throne, you've got to step up now. Become the man you were born to be. It's exactly like Lord of the Rings. You've got to do this now. You've got to man the fuck up. You've got to do what needs to be done. You've got to take her out, and you've got to assert yourself as the new ruler of the Seven Kingdoms on the throne. And he still says he doesn't want it. And that's it. Like, you could end Jon Snow's fucking character arc there. In that decision there, that was the one moment they could have turned this around. If he'd have gone, it would have taken him a long time to get there and his character would have still been written absolutely horrifically. But if in that moment he had decided to take up the throne and be the man he was meant to be, that would have at least some shred of dignity in Jon's character would have been saved. But it isn't. So we have Jon approaching the throne room, Daenerys at the Iron Throne. It's very interesting to note as well, she doesn't actually get to sit in the throne, which I actually thought was a very good decision. She's gone through all of this. She's taken the kingdom, well, she's decimated the kingdom. I need to go back to her speech, actually. So they're sitting atop a ruin, which is obvious considering she leveled the entire city, and this is like a matter of minutes, hours after that desolation. How is she going to rule there? Because, if she plans to stay there for a very long time, and I expect she does, because, she's going to want to assert herself as queen there and rule the kingdoms forever, or for a very considerable future, she's going to need to rebuild the damn castle and the city and bring in food and work and jobs and money and gold. All of these things that come with manual labor. She's killed all of the manual labor. And she also wants to decimate the rest of the world. Who is she going to rule? I said this in the last episode. Who is she going to rule? What was this in aid of? Like, are the Unsullied also, like, they're great soldiers. They've been trained in the art of warfare since infancy. I don't think they can pick up like a fucking, hammer and chisel and start working on some construction. Like, I'm not going to see in full armor plate Dothraki and Unsullied standing on top of a fucking scaffolding and building some buildings. Like, shit ain't going to happen. This isn't Age of Empires where you can just click and it's built. How is she going to rebuild? It's so terrible. Like, she did not think this through at all. It's so bad. So, Jon, you have your Twilight dialogue. You have your kissy, kissy, huggy, huggy, I love you. Which I swear to God is all the only dialogue that Jon Snow has had this entire season. It's either, but she's our queen, I love her, or I don't want it. They're like the three lines that they've just spammed the entire way through this season with Jon. They have a little heart-to-heart, and he's still kissing her. He is still kissing her. He has been told that she is his auntie. He knows this. He knows that he's a Targaryen. He even mentions it that, but I'm your nephew. You're my auntie. This shit isn't going to work. Apparently, it's working for him. It's doing something for him. It's stirring Jon Snow's loins because, he gets off to that incest shit. Now, I know some of you are probably going to say, the Targaryens over the ages, they used to wed brother and sister and everything like that. Incest is like part and parcel of the whole Targaryen gig, right? But he grew up in the north, and I think even Tyrion said, or was it Varys, that I don't think Jon is accustomed, are people in the north accustomed to marrying their aunts? Apparently so, because he is down with it. He is unnaturally cool with this, and it's really disturbing. And I think it actually would have aided Jon Snow's character even more if once he found that out, he did completely distance himself. And we get the impression, and even in these final moments that they have together, we get the impression that she's still trying to play that card of, join me and together we can rule the galaxy as aunt and nephew. She's still playing that card, the love card, in order to just curry favor with him. She doesn't really love him, we don't think. She's just using it as a tactic, a bargaining tactic to get him on her side and to crush any potential rebellion. But also we have Daenerys wanting to kill all of her enemies and anyone who opposes her. She already knows that Jon Snow opposes her, and actually that was one of my favorite moments. I'll throw my throw my 2 cents into this season of scenes that I liked. Before we got the crushing disappointment, which was episode 3, The Long Night, that final moment of episode 2, where the dead is coming, this huge force, the force that we need to focus on, the thing that really means something, this ancient evil. Forget about the petty squabbling over the throne. The throne, the monarchy doesn't matter. We need to survive this ancient evil. And even after everyone said that and everyone's ready for war and manning the walls, in that moment, she is still bringing up the fact that she's like, so you could oppose me on the throne. And even in those moments, it's a great moment. And it might be the last great moment of this season where you think that, oh my God, all this has been for nothing. She has still got her head in the clouds. She's still got her head on the throne. Her mind is at the throne and not in the bigger picture. And that was such a great moment, which was completely undone in episode 3, where she's saving Jon Snow. Why would she save him? If anything, it would have played into her character more if she saw Jon Snow in peril and chose not to save him and wanted him to die. So many of these moments I could talk about that would have been, you could, under the same situation, you could have the same situation, but just a few tweaks to the writing here and there could have really reinforced the characters a lot more. And in this moment here, we have Jon Snow killing Daenerys, which was part of the leak. I knew it was coming, and it was kind of gearing up that way. I don't know if that was a surprise to anyone when that happened. I saw it coming a mile off. We don't really get any kind of ending monologue with Daenerys. She just kind of dies. And you don't feel anything. All these moments feel completely emotionally hollow in this episode. I'm going to take another quick swig of water before I get onto the Iron Throne segment with Drogon. I'm going to go back and read some of you guys' comments because the comments are piling up thick and fast. This is awesome. Right, so let's scroll back a little bit here. Multiple Man says, I thought there was a time jump in this episode which was highlighted by the change in weather. Yeah, you're probably right, because I think there's a moment where Jon Snow approaches Drogon, right, and it looks like he's been sleeping, so maybe that's the next day. But I will say how it's put together, it does feel like, you've got 80 minutes to tie all this shit up. And as JX said earlier, the season is pretty much over halfway through. The main core story is over halfway through the episode. So it feels very condensed. It feels very rushed, therefore giving the illusion that it feels like this is all taking place on the same day as the attack on King's Landing. Elizabeth says, I hated the shift in time after the throne scene. It just didn't flow. I wanted to see what would happen to Jon and how people reacted. I think that's Game of Thrones Season 8 in a nutshell. They just cut to black at the most important bits. Remember when, all of the Unsullied fleet was destroyed and apparently they were all dead, but now they're all back again. And Missandei was captured. Stuff that we really should have seen and we don't see. Going back to season 1 where they cut to black for the, the big epic final battle where Tyrion gets knocked on the head. And similar to the Hobbit novel, he wakes up afterwards and the battle's all said and done. It's frustrating, but you know why they did it back then. They didn't have the budget. They didn't have the budget to film a full-scale battle and the spectacle that they now have with their budget when we get to the likes of, season 2 and especially when we get to season 8. Brinsley says 10 seasons would have been perfect. See, I'm inclined to agree, but also with the writing that we had in season 7 and season 8, would 2 more seasons of terrible writing really done anything different? You've got to ask yourself that, the fact that it's ended now at 8 seasons, 2 very short seasons with season 7 and season 8, is that a small mercy? If they'd have dragged this out to 10 seasons, I'm not saying that the character development would have been better, but with the writing that they've had, would it have been better? Would you have wanted 2 more seasons of this shit? I guess we'll never know. We'll never know what those seasons would have turned out like. Let's see what else we've got. JXC's finding loads of comparisons now between Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings. They're there. If you look for them, they're definitely there. Multiple Man says, travel has always been fast in Game of Thrones. In season 1, for example, Tyrion was at Winterfell, went to the Wall, spent some time there, returned to Winterfell, and by episode 5 was imprisoned in the Eyrie. Yeah, but I think the distance between the Wall and Winterfell, it's big. Like, I'm not going to say it's not a huge trek, but it's relatively closer than, say, going from fucking Dragonstone all the way to the Wall. Remember that in season 7 where they're all cornered on that patch of ice with the Night King, and he tells Gendry to run back to the Wall, which would take like days, and send a raven to Daenerys, and then the raven's got to fly to Dragonstone, and then Daenerys has got to read it and then respond to it and then fly back up to the Wall, and all of this shit happens in like the matter of hours. Like, that's when I start having a problem with things, where stuff just happens because it has to. Is that Schismatic says, we didn't get to see anyone's reaction to Daenerys' death except for Drogon. Exactly. And this is going to be as good a point as any to jump back into the Drogon death, sorry. The aftermath of Daenerys' death, or as Schismatic has just put it, the lack of it. I'm saying a lot. I'm going to try and stop that, folks. Sorry. So Daenerys is dead. And right in those moments, we have Drogon swoop down, and he is pissed. Now, I knew that Jon Snow wasn't going to die. Like, I mean, the plot armor is strong with every character this entire season. So I knew that wasn't going to happen. But I will say, by God, the CGI on Drogon here looked absolutely incredible. And the thing is, with the exception of petting Ghost, because that was a very nice moment, and it was nice to see that they finally appeased the fans with that, because that pissed a lot of people off when he didn't say bye to Ghost, myself included. The most poignant moment for me this whole episode was a CGI dragon nudging his dead mom. Is anyone else in that same boat? Like, seriously, like, that was a beautiful moment. The CGI on Drogon was absolutely incredible. The sound effects, the sound design when he roars, the expression and everything. I loved it. Now, this is where it does get very stupid, though. Now, some of you may think that the imagery of, the dragon, of Drogon burning the Iron Throne is a cool image, and the Iron Throne melting into, like, this molten metal T-1000 style is a cool image. It is a cool image. It's cool to see that happen. Dragons are just cool. But are we meant to infer that Drogon is, savvy to the notion of the throne corrupting people and the horrible influence it has on everyone, and that he's got to break the wheel? Drogon breaks the wheel this episode, and it's hilarious. He knew that the throne was corrupting his mom, so he wanted to get rid of the throne so this couldn't happen to anyone else. Like, that's what we're meant to, like, gather from this, right? That's really dumb. Because, okay, right. Quick rewrite. Let's say the dragons in this show are like the dragons in Tolkien's mythology. Like Glaurung or Smaug or something like that. Dragons that have thought, have consciousness, are very conniving, very manipulative, have immense thoughts and knowledge, and can deconstruct people and can talk, or hell, even be telepathic or whatever. If those were the same dragons as in Game of Thrones, then that would make a lot more sense. If Drogon had have started talking at the end, it would have been absolutely hilarious and would probably have been very dumb. But that would have at least explained why he would understand the lure that the Iron Throne has to people and why he wants to get rid of it. As it is, it's a cool image. And it completely gets rid of the Iron Throne and takes us right into the epilogue of this episode, which, oh boy, we'll get to, because that's probably the most dumbest shit this entire episode. Did anyone else have a problem with that, with Drogon burning the Iron Throne and his thought process behind that? Because I thought that was absolutely hilarious. Elizabeth says, I was more upset seeing Drogon's reaction to Dany's death than her actual death. I'll absolutely agree. But then again, you know that I was never the biggest fan of Daenerys, although I liked what they were doing with her character before they shot that down in cold blood when we got to episode 5. Princely says, dragons are just cool, Chris. Yeah, you can quote me on that. Dragons are just cool. Do you think Dany warged a bit into Drogon and consciously destroyed the throne? No, because she has never been gifted this power. We have no history of her warging into dragons. We know they have a connection with each other, but to the level and to the extent of warging into the dragon, nah, like, that's just not happening. And I saw theories out there as well that Bran warged into Drogon, which explains why, or warged into Daenerys, which explains why the entire King's Landing was leveled, because secretly Bran wanted the throne. And guess what? Bran got the fucking throne. Okay, so just before we get to that bit, after Drogon's burnt the throne, it picks up Daenerys' body and flies away. Where are they going? We don't know. Like, they just fly off into the fucking sunset and that's it. So right there, Jon has killed Daenerys. There's a patch of blood on the floor. Let's go all fucking Agatha Christie on this bitch. Let's go all Hercule Poirot. Let's analyze the evidence. We have Jon Snow stood in an empty throne room. There is no Daenerys. There is a patch of blood on the floor, and the dragons just flew away with Daenerys in its claws. Okay, Grey Worm should have gone like, dude, where's Daenerys? And clearly we gather that Jon Snow just owns up to it because he's a goody two-shoes and says, oh yeah, I totally killed her. He could have just said, like, dude, you just see that fucking dragon just fly off with Daenerys? Like, what was up with that? Like, man, these dragons are fierce. Like, I would have never seen that coming. The dragon would have turned on his own mother. Oh, no. I'm your king now. Like, he could have done that, but he doesn't. But as someone said, the crucial moment where we see the fallout of and the ramifications of Daenerys' death is glossed over. It cuts to black. And we pick it up like weeks later when Jon Snow's been a prisoner. And if that's the case, why would he be taken prisoner? If he owns up to killing Daenerys, committing the ultimate treason, committing fucking regicide, like, why wouldn't Grey Worm just kill Daenerys there and then? Not Daenerys, sorry. Why wouldn't he have killed Jon Snow there and then? Why wouldn't the Dothraki, the Northmen, the fucking Unsullied just made Jon Snow into another human pincushion? It makes no sense. They just skip past all this integral stuff, but who cares, right? If the writers don't care, I don't care. Let's continue here. We're almost at the end, folks. We're kind of almost there, but there's still a lot to talk about, which might be an oxymoron. So yeah, Jon Snow's been arrested off screen, and Tyrion is also still a prisoner. So we open up with so. I am being summoned. 2 seconds. I'm live right now, so thank you for that. We have an interruption. That is the debut of my mother, ladies and gentlemen, on the show right there, off screen. So where was I? Goddamn, I'm so unprepared for this thing. I'm sorry. Oh yeah, the fucking epilogue. Right. Okay. We pick up a few weeks later. Now the season has been rushed up until this point. This episode has been rushed to this point. But this scene in particular felt the most rushed to me, to the point where they just throw everyone together, every side character, every house, in the most flat, drab, uninteresting camera angle known to man. We said this with like the Star Wars prequels, like the most uninteresting way you can ever film anything is just people sitting down and talking in a conversation. Unless you can do it well, like, you know, like the Council of Elrond in Lord of the Rings, like that is interesting stuff. That's great character stuff, good character building moments there. This is the most drab and boring framing ever. It's just a semicircle. It feels like a school theater production of Game of Thrones, and they've got this awkward semicircle of plastic chairs around, and they're all sitting on it. By the way, this is the scene where you can see the plastic bottle behind Samwell Tarly's feet. I didn't pick it out myself, but I saw the picture online, so you eagle-eyed people can probably find it. Brinsley says dragon boring. I said drab and boring with a B. Oh, there we go. He's corrected it. So they convene this council to deliberate on and decide the next ruler. And it gets so fucking dumb. It gets so dumb. So for some reason, Grey Worm has a say in any political matters now. He wants recompense for the death of Daenerys, and he wants Jon Snow to be sent to the Night's Watch. First off, is the Night's Watch still a thing? Like, when he said that, I kind of had to scratch my head a little and go, aren't they all dead? Is there any need for a Night's Watch anymore? Like, the task of the Night's Watch was to guard the realms of men against the dead. And the dead are dead. They got Ryan Johnsoned by Arya in episode 3. So they're out of a job now. Like, why is the Night's Watch still a thing? So that confused me a little. Why is Grey Worm still getting a say? He's a war criminal. Like, no, like, everyone could just be like, bitch, like, we're not listening to you, or like, kill him, or exile him. Like, what say does he have? He has no say. Who is he? When compared to all of these people who are like, you know, the Prince of Dawn, or the Queen of the Iron Isles, or you know, Sansa, who eventually, you know, she has essentially become Warden of the North, later becomes Queen of the North. You've got all these people who actually mean something, and then you've got the captain of a dead monarch. Like, no, like, they could just be like, Jon's staying, he's cool, you murdered loads of people, you slaughtered Lannister soldiers in cold blood when they'd surrendered. We sentence you to death, we sentence you to go to the Night's Watch, sir. How does Grey Worm have any knowledge of the Night's Watch, by the way, when he's from a completely different corner of the world and seems completely... All he knows is war and his life from across the sea. Like, how does he know about the Night's Watch? That was just a thought there. So they're all deliberating on who should be there. And you've got Davos there, and he's just like, why am I here? We don't know why he's there. He's a main character. He's a main side character. He has to be there. But for all intents and purposes, like, he is nothing. He is nothing. Why is he there? Edmure stands up and says, like, I'll be king. And then Sansa's just like, just take a seat. Just sit your ass down, Edmure. Like, no one gives a fuck about you, Edmure. And he does. The idea is that every so many years, they're going to convene a council, and they're going to this very same council, and they're going to deliberate on who they want to be the next king. Now, does anyone remember Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End? The Pirate Council, where they always try and deliberate on who they want to be the Pirate King. And there hasn't been a Pirate King for years. The reason being is everyone votes for themselves. Does anyone else see that situation arising in a few years' time? Because it's going to happen. Like, what happens? What happens in those moments where Prince of Dawn says, yeah, I should be king? And then, you know, anyone else, Davos says, I should be king. And then Samuel Tarly says, no, I should be king. Everyone votes for themselves. What happens then? Do we get a king? Or does someone bring an army and swords and kill everyone who opposes them in order to assert themselves as the king? And, you know, it just, we've got Iris in the comments, by the way, and the wheel just keeps repeating. And maybe that's what they're getting at, that no system is going to be successful. Every system is doomed to fail. It's just, it's so bad. The writing here is terrible. So Tyrion comes up, and for some reason Tyrion's allowed to speak despite being a prisoner. If that's the case, why isn't Jon Snow allowed to speak at this council? If Tyrion's allowed and he also committed treason before Jon Snow, why isn't Jon Snow allowed a voice? You know, we're carrying on anyway. And, you know, they're suggesting who should be king. And Tyrion says Bran. Now, again, this was another thing that was in the leak. I read it. I thought, that's so stupid it's going to happen. And guess what? It happens. Tyrion goes on this whole spiel about how Bran is their future, their present, their history. He knows everything. He's like a fucking crippled internet server. He knows everything. He knows more than Jon Snow, apparently. But let's cast our mind back to earlier in season 8, where they said, like, oh, Bran, you should be Lord of Winterfell. And he says, I don't want to be Lord. Well, sorry, he was like, I don't want to be Lord, because he's just, like, absolutely warged off his tits at this point. Like, he is He is the three-eyed raven. He is not Bran Stark. He is not a lord. He is not a king. He is not a civilian. He is the three-eyed raven. He is spiritually omnipotent and beyond any comprehension of anything. Bran is ancient. He's an ancient force in the world. And he's not good at making decisions. Like, they ask him something and he's just like, whatever will be, will be. I have seen the outcome of everything and I know all. If they came to him with some like really important legislation that they really needed to get taken care of, is he going to give an answer, or is he going to give some like fucking spiritual bullshit that doesn't amount to anything, and then the small council is going to rule him? It's so dumb. Why would Bran take it? And of course, like, he's all over that shit. He's just like, oh yeah, I'll be king. Yeah, that's a great idea. Even the actor who plays Bran, I think he said when he read the script, he thought it was a joke. And that just says it all. It is. It's a fucking joke. The way that I would have rewritten this scene. Now, I would have... Let's say that you want Bran to be king. And this is where JXC has his theory here. Where I think he called him Blood Raven. But essentially the three-eyed raven transmitted himself into Bran. Obviously, Bran becomes the new three-eyed raven. And this was the three-eyed raven's plan all along, planting visions in like the flame for Melisandre and the whole Lord of Light thing, and also the whispers in the Weirwoods and the visions and everything like that. This has all been part of the three-eyed raven's plan to seat himself in ultimate power on the Iron Throne. That was the theory that was out there. Now, permit me to pose another theory. Because right up until the end, people were swearing blind that the White Walkers were going to come back, that the Night King wasn't actually dead. If you wanted to kill the Night King, which I would have saved for the final episode, that should have been your main threat, should have been the White Walker force and the Army of the Dead. But let's say you did want to kill the Night King in episode 3. But you still wanted Bran to be on the throne, and you didn't want to end it with this very happy Disney ending, which is the ending we got. They kept saying that we were going to get a very, hard-hitting, and it's not going to be a happy ending. It was a happy ending. Of course it was a happy ending for the most part. I would have written it where, when the Night King touched Bran's arm and kind of left that imprint on his arm, kind of like the black spot from Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Man's Chest, they were saying that it was like a kind of homing beacon for the Night King to always find Bran. But I would have written it where they would have written in some kind of revelation into that moment where the Night King approached Bran and was staring at him, where he was transmitting his consciousness or his essence, the White Walker ability in him, into Bran, into that mark, thus turning Bran into a kind of unofficial Night King. He would become the new Night King. He would be the three-eyed raven who is now also the Night King. Both of which are ancient powers, right? The three-eyed raven and the White Walkers from like the ancient world. So when Bran, you could even have it where you could have had that theory where Bran walked into Daenerys and roasted King's Landing, decimating it all completely. And then at the end, like when he gets crowned king, you could have had like, this would have been very silly, and this is me just going off the cuff right here. You could have had like the end of Michael Jackson's Thriller, the music video to Thriller, where he turns to the camera and he's got the eyes. He could have turned to the camera and had blue eyes. And then you're like, shocker, like, oh shit, the Night King is on the throne. Like, the dead actually won, unofficially. The dead are on the throne and no one knows about it. That's awesome. They could have finally have brought desolation to the world. And, who knows, like maybe we could have got another winter soon. That's how I would have rewritten it if you wanted to keep the same plot points, and you would have ended it on a really somber ending. But you didn't have to have it where like everything was covered in snow and everyone was dead, but you could have planted the seeds for that where, this is what could happen and no one knows about it. This is terrifying. Bran appoints Tyrion as his hand, whatever. And he sentences Jon to join the Night's Watch. This is the moment where Bran is king. He could overrule anyone. Like, who's he going to piss off? Like, Grey Worm and his band of, like, few Unsullied? Like, why couldn't they have just... And this is a thing that I've seen people saying as well, like, when they could say unofficially, like, oh, yeah, we're sending Jon to the Night's Watch. And then like the Unsullied get that patch of land, don't they, or somewhere. They send them off to somewhere to like make their own life. So send them off there first, because they're just going to chill there. They're not going to do anything. And then just like casually pass a note to John, be like, only joking, like, you can come back. You come back. Give it a couple of days and then come back. Just like lay low for a couple of days, like hang out in like a burned ruin of the city, and then come back to us and all's forgiven, mate. Like, you're given a full pardon. The king has the ability to grant a pardon. Why doesn't he do that? Also, we have Yara as well, somehow opposing John, because she was pally with Daenerys. Where was Yara this entire series? Like, I was expecting her to rock up with a bunch of ships. We heard that she asserts herself as Queen of the Iron Isles. I was expecting her to rock up with a bunch of ships and have some naval combat with her uncle Euron, finally killing him, and, you know, actually having some kind of opposition to the Iron Fleet, which we didn't get. Why should she have a say? She did jack shit. Like, so what? Like, no. And this series feels so small. Like, we don't, as someone said, you know, I think it was Brinsley said, that we don't get a sense of what these ramifications, what were the ramifications of King's Landing being razed to the ground? On Dawn, on the Iron Isles, on Winterfell, on everywhere. How did these other provinces react to something like that? Something as cataclysmic as that happening? You know, I don't want to bring it like too into the real world, but it'd be like, you know, if 9/11 happens and you kind of want to see how the rest of the world reacts to something like that, right? It's, you know, it's in the same vein as that, but we don't get that. So here you have, like, you know, you have the Knights of the Vale, you have Dawn, you have the Greyjoys, you have the Tullys, but it's all crammed into like this 5-minute scene of them all together, and we don't really get any broader scope of the world. It is very much, as I said at the beginning, Winterfell and King's Landing and nothing else. It feels so small, it feels so insignificant. And I think if you had had more series, more episodes, you could have cut to these other provinces and really dragged it out some more. Have Daenerys on the throne and see what she's like. Maybe she would continue to be a tyrant. Maybe she would, you know, be a good queen once, you know, she's been absolutely horrible, and the amount of bodies that have piled up in order to seat herself on the throne. But she could justify that and say, like, look how many monarchs before have killed people in droves to get here. You know, like, she could say that my father was stabbed in the back by someone who was close to him. I don't want that to happen to me. Some kind of understanding in her character. Let's continue here. We're almost wrapped up. So Bran's king, Tyrion is the hand, and we have a small council meeting here. We have Brienne, who is the first female commander of the Kingsguard, which was cool. It was nice to see her finally in that armor, I will say that. Bronn returns and is now the master of coin. So where did that whole crossbow story, that subplot thing lead, right? Where he wanted to kill Jaime, where Cersei and Qyburn sent him out to kill Jaime and Tyrion for a price. Where did that amount to? Honestly, nowhere. You could have removed that entire subplot and just had this moment at the end where Bronn shows up and Tyrion goes, so you finally got your castles then, and that would still tie his character arc up neatly. You know, it was just absolutely pointless. Maybe it was a ploy to get Bronn into the series a lot more, but okay, Bronn as Master of Coin, please someone tell me how that's a good idea. Has Bronn ever proven himself to be, you know, like, wise with money and frugal when it has to come to it? No, he's like, he blows all of his cash on like hookers and fancy clothes and status and everything like that. That's all he does with his money. Like, how is he going to be, you know, oh no, we need to give some money to the poor. We need to distribute it to the rebuilding of ships and infrastructure and everything like that. No, he's not going to do that, which is clearly pointed out, which is played off as laughs, where I think he's arguing with Davos or Brienne, where they're saying, well, I think that, you know, our ships and our buildings take precedence over rebuilding the brothels. And he's like, you know, I think that's very presumptuous of you there. And it pulls back like it's also like it's some kind of 90s sitcom. And I'm just there like, oh my God, the fucking realm is doomed. How is this a good idea? Like, Bran is this like stoned guy in a wheelchair who's like not going to do anything. He's just going to be omnipotent. You know, you've got this whoremongerer who's the master of coin. This is not a good setup for a future. Like, I guarantee this realm would crumble within a few years. All you need is the slightest opposition, and the whole thing is dead. I didn't mention as well, Sansa points out that she wants the North to remain, you know, independent, and she becomes Queen of the North. Whatever, fine. Like, I like Sansa's character. I can see her being in that role, but her being crowned Queen in the North just like that, maybe a little quick. I'm going to get onto a massive rant in a minute about Brienne. Oh, sorry, I need to talk about A Song of Ice and Fire. I'll talk about this first, and then I'll talk about my Brienne rant. A Song of Ice and Fire. JXE says, when I heard the title of this episode was called A Song of Ice and Fire, I thought Dany would turn on Jon and Dracarys him, but he'd be fine. An all-out brawl would break out between the two armies. That would have been a better ending. I'm not going to lie. Like, if they'd have, like, put their budget on that instead, then maybe that would have been a better ending. But I, too, also heard... I heard that like a bunch of the episode titles had got leaked. I think it was like episode 4, 5, and 6. None of those titles were the final titles. That like episode 6 was going to be called A Song of Ice and Fire, which I thought was a great title. You know, it really tied it all together, gave it that sense of finality. It was changed to the Iron Throne, whatever. Sam brings out this tome that is called A Song of Ice and Fire. Could you be more on the nose? And it completely reminded me of the ending of Return of the King, where Frodo's writing, you know, There and Back Again, A Hobbit's Tale by Bilbo Baggins, and The Lord of the Rings by Frodo Baggins. But where that makes sense in The Lord of the Rings is that those books are actually written from the first-hand account of Bilbo Baggins and Frodo, respectively. And then the Red Book of Westmarch is then passed to, you know, Samwise Gamgee, and he continues to write it there. That makes sense in that story to, you know, do a title drop to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings at the end of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. This is just dumb. And then Tyrion's been excised out of it. Why would he be excised out of the book? It's played for laughs. Like, that's the biggest fucking slight in this entire episode, right? You know, Tyrion has done so much. He has been present in the histories, and he's not in there. So, you know, what the fuck ever, right? I'm gonna take another drink of this. I'm not going to drink any more whiskey, I promise, guys. We're almost at the end. We're almost at the end of this. Let's go back. Schismatic says Lucasfilm should have hired everyone involved in Game of Thrones except D&D. I completely agree with that. Roll on for that trilogy, right, of Star Wars films, as if Star Wars wasn't already dead and buried enough for me. A trilogy by these guys, and potentially an Old Republic trilogy by these guys, that's going to be hilarious. And also, if these are the kind of writers where if they get given a better gig or a gig that's more appealing to them, they just completely botch the ending of whatever they're working on. They just like drop whatever it is they're working on and just go, let's just write this. Bran is king. Fine, right, let's work on Star Wars. What does that say about them as writers? Why wouldn't they go, right, we've got Star Wars, we've got our next gig lined up, we're going to start work on that, and that's going to be amazing. You know, we've got to say goodbye to Game of Thrones. Let's get this written and let's make this the best possible ending we can. Let's make Game of Thrones go out on a high note. Let's put our own signature and sign it off at the bottom, proud of Game of Thrones, this epic fantasy series that we've worked on. Great, that's done. Now let's work on Star Wars. It's like they've been at a job for years that they hate, and they've just mentally checked out, and they're just going through the motions, and they're doing the least amount of work as possible. Let's see what else we've got here. Why would Sansa want the North to be independent when it's a Stark that's on the throne? That is so stupid. I think she does that in order to secure the future of the monarch that would succeed Bran. You know, it could go the same way that the system went years ago. So that's she's probably like getting it done now while her brother's in power and why he can grant that wish to her. She's probably just doing it in aid of that, I guess. Let's see. Game of Thrones got them the Star Wars gig, those disrespectful twats. Yeah. And right, I'm calling it now. And I know it's unfair to judge a trilogy before it's even been written or a trailer's out or we've had any casting. It's going to be terrible. Like, I just know it. It's going to be terrible. So the fact that they've just, like, pissed off an entire fan base, you've got petitions out there for wanting to, like, redo the entirety of Game of Thrones season 8. And, you know, if you're going to do a petition for that, can you also, like, get them to redo season 7 while they're at it? I mean, that's never going to happen. That's just absolutely idiotic. No matter how many names you have on a piece of paper, HBO are never going to commission a multi-million-dollar series, bringing all of that cast back. You know, they're going to have their own schedules now and other jobs lined up. And we've got 5. They're already working on the prequel series of Game of Thrones, so they're not going to redo a series. It's absolutely stupid. We just need to resign ourselves to the fact that one of the greatest TV shows ever made, one of the finest examples of any media we've ever seen come to the small screen, a series that almost felt like a big budget movie, some visuals that even surpassed most big budget movies, has a lackluster ending, has a really disappointing ending. Let's continue here. My Brienne rant. Okay, this broke my damn heart. She's writing in the, this compendium of all the commanders of the Kingsguard, and she goes to Jaime Lannister's, and obviously his honors have been cut short because he was the Kingslayer, right? He was he sacrificed his honor for the innocent people of King's Landing to save them from a tyrant and thus ruining his name forever. And apparently last episode, I never really cared about them, innocent or otherwise. Like, fuck you, D&D. Like, fuck you. Like, that, honestly, I think Jaime's character is the one that I'm most perturbed about and, like, really genuinely angry about. And she's writing, I couldn't see all the things that she wrote, but I guess, like, stood up for a lady's honor, saved her, sacrificed himself, got his hand cut off because of it, freed me to go in search of the Stark girls and protect them. And the last thing she writes in that book, died defending his queen. Like, I shipped Brienne and Jaime since they started getting together. And when they were phrasing it for, Brinsley says, time for another drink, Chris. I think you're right. Like I said, I wasn't going to drink anymore. I need to. Man, I need to. That whole, like, Godfather gif of look how they massacred my boy. That's it for Jaime Lannister right here. I'm going to take another swig. Oh, God. That is some really genuinely vile stuff. The drink and what they did to Jaime. When she writes that in the book, like, it broke my damn heart. Like, not only what they did to Jaime, what they did to Brienne, the fact that they got together finally. He made her a knight. He showed genuine affection and admiration for her, which didn't feel feigned. It didn't feel like it was some kind of sadistic, horrible act. It was genuine in that moment. And people have said earlier, like, one of their favorite moments from season 8, myself included. Not anymore. Now we have hindsight of what he did and went back to Cersei. It was one of my favorite moments, was where he made her a knight. And by God, that smile, Gwendolyn Christie in that moment when she's made a knight, that smile is completely infectious. It just breaks my damn heart when I see a smile there. Then in the next episode, they sleep together. Like, she's a virgin. Like, she's always been awkward around guys. You can clearly tell she's always been into Jaime, but she's just always been awkward about it. And, they get together. And I shipped that so hard. That was one of the happiest moments of season 8 for me. And I'm going to reiterate what I said, like, in the next episode where he says, where he's leaving Winterfell and leaving her, he's leaving her there. he says that, you know, I'm not an honorable man. Like, I've done despicable things, like in the name of Cersei. And it's phrased from the perspective of that he's going to go back to King's Landing and he's going to put an end to Cersei. Like, he's going to kill Cersei. She is the ball and chain. She is the fly in the ointment. Like, he can't have a happy life. He can't move on with his life until this huge shadow that's cast over his life, which is Cersei, is gone, is eradicated. And because, you know, they were born together, they loved each other, it has to be on his terms. He has to do it. If they'd have gone with that direction, hell, even if they'd have kept like the Daenerys burning King's Landing and all that shit, if he'd have still gone to King's Landing in that moment, and she could have been like, oh, Jaime, thank God, like, finally you've come to rescue me. And he's like, nah. And, you know, he stabs her in the belly. I mean, if he stabs her in the belly, that's brutal, right? Because she's pregnant at that point. Not only is he killing her, he's killing his unborn child. He is completely distancing himself. And you could draw parallels. It's slightly different, but in episode 1 of season... in episode 1 of season 1, he pushes a child out of a window with the intention of killing that child. Like, Jaime Lannister has attempted to kill children before. Now, this would be killing an unborn child, which is very different, some may argue. I'm not going to get onto that whole debate there. That would have been a nice parallel there. He would kill Cersei. And hell, even if you had it where he killed Cersei, he accomplished what he needed to, he could move on with his life, but there was nothing else left for him. Like, when Cersei died, a part of him died too, and then he got caught in the rubble as well on the way out. You know, at least it would have been a somewhat decent... He would have completed his character arc. He would have died on his own terms, knowing that he could never have been truly happy with Brienne, but knowing that he had to kill Cersei. That's how I would have written it. And then when she writes in that moment, like, you could have a... Not writing died saving his queen, but just like, died protecting the realm or something like that. You know, saved his honor or something as the closing line, and then her crying. That would have been way more poignant. That would have hit... Oh, man, could you imagine that? That would have absolutely ruined me in that moment if that's how it went down. But as it is, we have her writing, you know, like, fucking Cersei, the skanky bitch, like, Jaime Lannister, fucking no good, man slag, man whore, one night standing motherfucker. Like, no, that's not the ending that I wanted for these characters. I think even Gwendolyn Christie said that when she realized what the fate of having Jaime leave her in that moment, right after they did what they did, I think she got super angry. I think she went on record and said, like, she had to go on a long walk because she was that pissed off of what they did with the character. And I believe it. And it's not just her, it's the entire cast. Like, Peter Dinklage is let down with how this thing turned out. Kit Harington, who plays Jon Snow, is really significantly underwhelmed and called it disappointing. Emilia Clarke as well. The one who plays Grey Worm and Gendry, everyone. Arya becomes Dora the Explorer and decides to be Captain Jack Sparrow and sail to the west. What is west of Westeros? Is it Middle-earth? Post in the comments where you think... what do you think lies west of Westeros? Is it Fantasia from Neverending Story? Who knows? Get commenting where you think it is. So she just sails off. The only point in Game of Thrones where she's been seafaring is where she traveled to Braavos, but she's been trained as an assassin. That's all she knows. Why wouldn't she do something with that? You know? Like, I watched a video somewhere on the internet and he compared it to it'd be the equivalent of John Wick getting a job at Starbucks. Like, it's just not in her character. Like, so what? She's just going to sail? She's just going to be on the sea? Okay. Fine, D&D. I'll play ball. As I mentioned, Sansa is crowned Queen in the North. Now, this is interesting. Bran says that he can find Drogon. And actually, this might be earlier in the episode, and this is going to tack on to my end where I talk about, like, the future of Game of Thrones and where I think it's going to go, and if they will indeed do a sequel series, if anything, to patch up the fucking atrocity that was this series. But I don't think that's going to be a lot of patching, and I don't think anyone is humanly possible of doing that at this point. Bran says that he can find Drogon. It's never really amounted to anything. It's never really chased up on. Tyrion says to Jon he will see him in 10 years. He says, give it 10 years, and I'm sure that I'll come and visit again to the Wall. Keep that 10 years in mind. because I'm going to bring that up towards the end. So Jon says goodbye to his sisters and his brother on the harbour, on the shores of the sea, which totally isn't like Lord of the Rings in any way, shape, or form when we get to the Grey Havens at the end of that movie. God damn, these comparisons to Lord of the Rings, they're just all over the place in this thing. So yeah, Jon Snow is shipped off to the fucking wall. Tormund's waiting there, and Ghost. The one nice moment of this series was where he finally does pet Ghost. It was a long time coming. It was a nice moment. That was the only point of the episode that made me smile and gave me any sense of joy. It's probably because I'm a dog lover. I don't know. And then, yeah, he just sort of goes beyond the wall. Now, at this point, Jon is taking the black, even though he's with the Northmen and, like the people from the Wildings beyond the wall. He's not technically part of the Night's Watch because the Night's Watch is no longer a thing. So do the rules still apply? Like Tyrion says, like, you will take no wife, you will father no children. I'm guessing in that moment that's them trying to say that the lineage of the Targaryens is over. Like, as Jon Snow won't be able to reproduce and won't be able to have sire and heir, the Targaryen name will die with him. But like, come on. Like, there are a lot of wildling women up there. Like, I know, like, that. Well, clearly he's got over Ygritte, right? Because he was like shacking up with Daenerys, his aunt, or he was at least trying to. He nailed her, so he's moved on very quickly. He's a man that can move on very quickly. Like, come on, who's going to keep tabs on him? Like, Jon Snow is so far beyond the wall. He is like the furthest north you can be. He is in buttfuck nowhere. Are they really going to keep like sending people up and saying like, have you got a wife? You got a secret wife? You got a kid? Don't do that. Like, no, he's a free man. He can do whatever the fuck he wants to do. And if anyone like comes up and questions him, you think Tormund's going to let someone talk to Jon Snow that way? No. So of course he can have a kid. And also we need to remember, and this is also a plot point that was never addressed. The beginning of episode 5, the previous episode, where we see Varys writing a letter to someone proclaiming Jon as the true heir. We never see where those letters go. That's never really tied up or amounted to anything. So if anyone's familiar with the ending of Watchmen with Rorschach's journal, where like the whole thing's going to start again, like, is that going to start speculation of the true heir, the true Targaryen heir that is Jon Snow, the prince who was promised, the king that we should have? Is that setting up for that? I don't know. Again, in 10 years' time, sequel series. I'm calling it. We're going to get a sequel series to this thing. That's them. It's probably, we'll see how the prequel series go. We'll see if we still get the money coming in. And then, boom, imagine that after 10 years. It'll be like Lord of the Rings with The Hobbit. When The Hobbit was first announced, it's like, we're going back to Middle-earth, folks. Like, let's do this thing. Imagine 10 years' time, you get Peter Dinklage back. You get Jon Snow back. You get, like, all your main core cast back that you can. And obviously introduce new characters. And just go, like, boom, sequel series. Let's get Tyrion meeting Jon Snow. Jon Snow secretly still has a claim to the throne. The letters that Varys have sent out have spread far and wide across the 7 kingdoms, or sorry, 6 kingdoms now. And then that starts the whole thing up again. I think it's them going like, yeah, we'll set the groundwork now and just see in 10 years' time if we can pull this thing off. That's my thought. I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you think that the 10 years later thing has any merits? Do you think they'll do anything with that? So the final shot is Jon Snow going beyond the wall, and he kind of takes like one last look back as the door comes down, separating him off from the rest of the kingdoms. He is now beyond the wall and can never go back. Except there's a huge gaping hole in the wall where the Night King punched through with a dragon. So he can like saunter onto those other kingdoms whenever he damn well pleases. Apparently there's not many people there now. There was only Yara who opposed him and Grey Worm. Grey Worm's in one patch of land and he's just going to be chilling there. Like, how are they going to survive? All they know is war and bloodshed. Like, do they farm? Do they build? Do any of them have jobs outside of slaughtering women and children? Like, I want to know these things. And Yara's in, the Iron Islands, so Like, what's she gonna do? Like, Jon Snow can just go back. Of course he can go back. Like, do you really think that anyone in King's Landing is going to oppose him coming back? Like, no, of course they're not. So that's it. Brinsley says, "Do you even farm, bro?" Schismatic says, "You will discover America." Maybe this is all like pre our world. Maybe this is like gonna like eventually turn into modern day Earth. Who knows? Yeah, I think Claudia is saying that they reused the CGI of Jon Snow petting Ghost. Like they just reused a shot straight up. Like that's terrible if they did that. Iris says there's a big gap in the wall at Eastwatch. What's the point of the Night's Watch? Exactly. You know, it's just so bad. Let's have a look at what else we've got. Comments. Schismatic says John totally got sold out by Bran and Sansa. Absolutely, man. Like, okay, and let's talk about this. So everyone says that Bran is a great leader, right? A great king. A noble king. Will be the best king there's ever been. He knew everything, right? He knew the outcome of everything. He could see everything. So he knew that Daenerys would lay waste to an entire city and murder women and children, like thousands of women and children and innocents. He's as much of a fucking war criminal as Grey Worm or even Daenerys. He's an accomplice to murder. He knew all the shit went down and he didn't say anything. And then just goes, oh yeah, like I'll be king. I'll be your king. Like, I'll accept that. Like if everyone's voting for me, like sure, why not? This is terrible. Like Bran is a horrible person. Kill Bran. He is an awful human being for letting this go on. But hey, like if he'd have stopped that happening, maybe he wouldn't have become king, right? Like Bran is the ultimate villain. Elizabeth says regarding the sequel series, they will do more. It's obvious there are so many stories to carry on with. Yeah, let's hope it's not D&D. Let's hope it's an actually competent writer. Personally, like I'm done with Game of Thrones. Like I don't care about a sequel series unless they do something really like game changing with it, you know, like and actually advance it in some way. But even then, the prequel series. Are any of you hyped for the prequel series? I believe the first one's going to be about the White Walkers. But having seen what happened to the White Walkers and how they just got completely Ryan Johnson by Arya in the last second and they really amounted to anything, is there really any point going back and discussing the history of the White Walkers and fleshing them out? Like, no, like you can make them appear like the most ultimate badasses you've ever seen. But they're going to die in like the most anticlimactic way ever and accomplish exactly diddly squat. So what's the point in watching the prequel series? Brinsley says that he'll watch it. Now, Robert's Rebellion, I'd love to see that. And like, I'm trying to think of who they could cast as a young Robert. Gods, he was strong, caved in his breastplate, probably shattered every bone he had in his body. Like, I would love to see an actor try and take on that role. That would be cool. David H says, is this streamer a book reader? You can refer to me as Chris. That's nice. This streamer is a bit impersonal. Yes, I have read the books. It's been years since I have read them. And in all honesty, like book 4 and 5 are kind of a blur for me. I do need to go back and reread them. I think I'm going to have a break from Game of Thrones, though, for a while and just sort of like let the dust and ashes of the fallout of the atrocity that was season 8 settle a little bit first. And then I might go back and read the books. And hell, who knows? Like by the time I've got done reading the books, maybe book 6 will be out. That would be very nice if that's the case. But yes, I have read the books. Let's see what else we have here. Any other comments? So yeah, I guess this is like my epilogue now. I'm going to give my final thoughts on Game of Thrones in a second. But it's good to see you guys getting involved. We've had so many people here in the comments today. I think this is probably the best turnout we've had for one of these streams for the reviews of Game of Thrones. So thank you to everyone tuning in and sticking with me this long through my perhaps slightly tipsy ramblings. So thank you. Hopefully, did you guys enjoy the stream? Are you enjoying the stream? Hopefully, I know it's not the same without me and Tate back and forthing, but hopefully, like, I've managed to like host it okay. Like, did you enjoy the show? Like, please do let me know. A man has read the books. Yes, I have indeed. David H says, I feel like people miss the ending with Brienne writing Jaime's entry and the Archmaester writing A Song of Ice and Fire. Unreliable narrators exist. The show is in the books. You can't treat anything as gospel. That's true. That's true. Like the whole, you know, as you said, unreliable narrator. I think George R. R. Martin tries to be as reliable as possible, but I've seen interviews with him where he has said that he has made mistakes, you know, regarding people's eye colors, which then brings into the question, is he an unreliable narrator? Schismatic says, greatest TV show ever with the most anticlimactic ending ever. Here's the thing, like, I've always said that if an ending to something is so great, but the rest of the film, like if this could go for a film as well, whether it's a TV show or a film, whatever it happens to be, if the ending is really good and leaves an impact with you, but the rest of the film's just been kind of meh, I'm telling you, man, that ending elevates it for me. Like, because that is the last thing, that is the last impression that you have when you walk out of that cinema, when you change that channel on the TV. That is what you carry with you after that. Like, you can, and if it's got a great ending and it culminates in something massive, you can forgive. Believe me, you can forgive a lot of stuff in the rest of the film. And, you know, the opposite of that, if you have a terrible ending, if you've set up all this stuff for 8 years, I've been watching this show for 8 years. That is insane. I still remember, I'm going to, bit of history right now. Why not? Because we're all about the history of Game of Thrones. This is a kind of Game of Thrones. I almost feel like I'm at a wake. I almost feel like I'm there with the dead body of Game of Thrones in front of me, and I'm kind of giving some kind of unofficial eulogy about it. Like, it's faults, but it's good points, and it's memory and everything like that. So Game of Thrones, I got into it. I remember seeing the posters for this thing, and it was the poster of Ned Stark sitting on the throne with ice and sort of like hunched over like this and looking at it, Sean Bean on the throne. And honestly, I thought it was some kind of Lord of the Rings tie-in series. He looked exactly like Boromir. And I don't know why I saw fantasy, Game of Thrones. I saw, you know, Boromir right in front of me, Sean Bean, stupid of me. I'd never heard of the books at this point. I'd never heard of Game of Thrones. And at that point, it was still very much an underground thing. People who were like deep into the books and knew what it is. This new HBO show, Game of Thrones, what is this thing? It hadn't broken into the mainstream. And that's where most shows die for me when they hit the mainstream. They just tank, and Game of Thrones was exactly the same way. It became very easy. It became very crowd-pleasing. And my friend was reading the book. He says, you know, this new show looks pretty good. I've started reading the book. I'm about halfway through. Once I finished it, you can have it if you want. To which I agreed. And he gave me like the spiel on it. He says that it's about houses and different houses. You've got the Stark house, you've got the Lannister house, Baratheon, Targaryen, and they're all vying for the throne, and it's all done from different characters' perspectives. It sounded really interesting to me. He says it was fantasy done with kind of like a Tudor twist, like a real life history, very complex writing. You're going to love it. And then once I had this information, I spoke to another one of my friends, and he also said like, oh, I've read it. Yeah, it's fantastic. I've got the book. Like, you can have it now. So he lent it me. And that's what started it all. I read the first book. I powered through it so quickly. And actually, I wanted to try and watch the series and read the book simultaneously. I read about 110 pages of the book. I literally just got to the bit where Jaime pushed Bran out the window, and that's where I got up to in the episode. I thought, God, I've been reading for ages. 100 pages is loads. I'm good to watch the TV series now. And the end of episode 1 ended with Bran getting pushed out the window, and I just thought, oh shit, I probably should read these books first. So, you know, I read book 1, I watched season 1, and then by that point, I was waiting a year for season 2 to come out, and in that point, I managed to read, you know, the majority of the books. I think I was on about book 3 or book 4 by that point, and when season 2 rolled out. So I was always well ahead of the TV series. And that's what started my love for Game of Thrones, which has now sadly been extinguished. I own the first 7 seasons of Game of Thrones on Blu-ray in individual box sets. My season 7, is still in the wrapping. I haven't unwrapped it because I hated season 7, and I only bought it out of this misplaced sense of completion that I wanted all the seasons there. I'm not going to buy season 8 because I'm not going to watch Game of Thrones anymore. I'm not even going to go back to those earlier episodes because what's the point? Honestly, with TV shows, I very rarely go back and watch individual episodes again. In fact, I very rarely go back and watch a series all the way through again. Once I've given so many years of my life to watching this and being invested in these characters, once I've seen the entire story played out, I always find it very difficult going back to the start and devoting that amount of time again to rewatching all those episodes once you know how it all plays out. There's some exceptions to that. I've done that with Lost, but that was only when I've been showing it to other people. But yeah, it's very rare that I'll go back and rewatch a TV series. Like, obviously not counting comedy TV series and things like that. Narrative TV series, I'm kind of a one and done. So yeah, Game of Thrones, like season 1, like I was rewatching some scenes from season 1. Let's talk about some of our favorite scenes right now, and then I'll wrap up after that. Favorite scenes in season 1, anything with Varys and Littlefinger, like, boy, those actors bought it, and the writing was fantastic for those the first couple of seasons. I loved seeing them play off with each other. My favorite scene in Game of Thrones history, you might be thinking, oh, it's a battle scene, it's like an awesome quippy line. My favorite scene, which is not in the books, and it adds so many levels of character to Cersei and Robert, it's in season 1, and it's where Robert and Cersei are discussing their marriage and how it's tied the realms together. Do you ever get tired? And she says, like, every day. And she talks about that they lost a child. None of this is in the books. She talks about that they lost an infant child. And for, you know, a very brief moment, she thought there was hope that she could love this man, that he could love her, and they could make it work. And she says, was there ever a moment where it could have worked? And he says, no. And he says, does that make you feel better or worse? And she just takes a sip of wine and says, it doesn't make me feel anything. Oh my God, are you kidding me? Perfectly acted with those characters, with those actors, sorry. Lena Headey, like, I keep joking, like, future wife, like, I love Lena Headey. I think she's a fantastic actress, and I think she just nailed the character of Cersei. Beginning to end, even when she didn't get any lines in season 8 and she just had to look menacing on a balcony and drink wine out of a goblet. Guess what? She looked menacing on a balcony and drank from that goblet with that wine in there. Like, she did it. She was great. There's so many, like, just earlier seasons. Actually, my favorite battle in Game of Thrones, some people might say, you know, the Battle of the Bastards, which I actually thought was a fantastic battle scene. Definitely one of my favorites, probably my second favorite. My favorite battle in Game of Thrones history, and probably my favorite standalone episode, is Blackwater, episode 9 of season 2. At that point, I hadn't seen a battle like that on the small screen. Now, when you go back and watch that now, it's probably small potatoes when we see the stuff that we get in, like, season 8 and Dragonfire and Desolation and Explosions and White Walkers attacking and everything like that. But at that time, I thought it was structured perfectly. I believe that episode was written by George R.R. Martin, and boy, does it show, right? It's perfectly paced. You get punctuation in the action with cutting back inside King's Landing. It keeps it tethered to the humanity. You have Cersei getting drunk with the flock of hens, as she calls them, the civilians, the people of King's Landing, all the women and children, and she's kind of grooming Sansa for commanding, trying to, like, make her understand her thought process and how she sees the world. Even before Littlefinger started doing that, you could argue. And I just love that, like the wildfire explosion. Joffrey being a complete coward, the Hound being terrified of the fire when he sees the burning troops. Tyrion making his last stand, getting his face cut, and then in the very next episode, just getting no regard for the battle. That shot of Tywin with the Tyrell forces in slow motion charging, it almost looks like a tapestry. Oh my God, so much great imagery from those earlier seasons. And I'm just going on like a Game of Thrones hype now. Like, I love earlier seasons of Game of Thrones. Did they change some things from the book? Yes. Did the changes get more and more rampant as the seasons went on? Yes. And then we talk about the worst things in Game of Thrones, like the entirety of season 8, pretty much the majority of season 7, and the Dawn storyline from season 5. Like, I will forgive Game of Thrones many things, but that Dawn storyline, oh boy, I will never forget. I will never forgive the Dawn storyline and how they handled that. But even with the Dawn storyline, which really did piss me off, and is just that it's the splinter in the side of Game of Thrones up until that point, before we got to the atrocities that were season 7 and 8. Even if that storyline was bad, you had so many other storylines going on that would make up for it, that you could focus on and still find enjoyment with. And then you get to season 8 and all of those storylines were just thrown out the window. We've still got people saying, Lena is awesome. Tyrion and Arya had the most interesting relationship in the whole series. I completely forgot about that. Yes, when she was his cupbearer at Harrenhal in season 2. The chemistry between those was just like, I could have watched the whole season with just those two. Like Charles Dance and Maisie Williams just played off each other beautifully in that. Let's go back to some comments here. We have TE3074 who says, I'm the same way, Chris. I won't go back and watch television shows that I've seen before. Yeah, I mean, maybe that's just me, but I always like to look and watch for new things as much as I can. And once I've seen a story played out, that's kind of it for me. David H says they rewrote the Dawn storyline a week before shooting because they hired a new team who had never done international shoots. They really wanted to tell Dawn. That breaks my heart, man. The rewriting a week before, that's when you get lines such as, you want a good woman, but you want the bad pussy, which is still the worst line in Game of Thrones history. Like they held auditions for the most amazing actress in Europe and cast them as the Sand Snakes. Yeah, and I think the one who plays Ilaria Sand, I can't remember her name of the actress, but she was in Rome. She's a fantastic actress, and she gave, by God, she gave the best that she could with the fucking material they had to work with in this piece of shit. Thoughts and prayers to her charred crushed skeleton in the dungeons of King's Landing. Yeah, so like some of you got, and this is nice, right? Let's end on a positive note as much as we can. Let's try and make the best of a bad situation here on our love for Game of Thrones. Now, what's going to be the fate of Game of Thrones for me? I already said that I'm not going to buy season 8. I kind of want to sell my box sets now, in all honesty, like having seen that it's amounted to nothing, to the most anticlimactic and poorly written TV series I've seen in a long time. Is there any point? Why would I show someone Game of Thrones for them to get invested in the same characters that I did for the last 8 years, and then it's going to amount to exactly nothing? I don't want to do that to someone. And a lot of TV shows go like that. Breaking Bad. I loved Breaking Bad, and the strongest episode of Breaking Bad, hilariously enough, was directed by Rian Johnson before he made the debacle that was The Last Jedi. A lot of parallels, actually, that you can draw from Game of Thrones to The Last Jedi, that whole subverting expectations culture, and whether that's an effective way of writing. I think it's a very easy way of writing. I don't think it's a good way of writing. I mentioned this last stream. A good example of subverting your expectations. Ned Stark's death and the Red Wedding, written by George R.R. Martin. You can understand, although it's shocking and it subverts your expectations, you can clearly see what had built up to that point to lead to that conclusion. Ned Stark's poor decisions, lack of political intrigue, and how the really corrupt and backstabby world of King's Landing works when he's been so used to the North and being an honorable man. This is not an honorable world. Like, this is not the world they live in. People will die left, right, and center, and there are consequences to poor decisions. Remember that when people didn't have plot armor, when you feared for the safety of every single character in the show? Undone. Like, Game of Thrones ceased to be a show about interesting characters and commentary on, brutality and, just what it was to be human. Really, like, some of you may see that as a kind of like really, poncy way of talking about it, but it really does. It's like the human condition, the lengths that people are willing to go to for power. It's going back to like old Shakespearean, plays like Macbeth, like the overambition, like the extent of ambition and what it drives people to do for power and for, prosperity and the monarchy. it was really good stuff. And there were so many layers to characters. There was no real hero or villain to it. Everyone had depth. Everyone had gray areas, which then became a show when we get to the likes of season, 6, you could argue, season 7, season 8, where it was just goodies and baddies, and everyone fell into their neat little trope and stuck to that, and the complex writing ceased to be. Brinsley says, I'll buy your Blu-ray box sets for cheap. Please do. Like, seriously, I'm going to try and see how much these individual box sets go for. Price them up and just package them off and just send them off to whoever the first person who buys them. Maybe I'll do a giveaway on the channel. We've never done a giveaway on Cinema Savvy in the 4 years that we've been on this channel. Would anyone be interested in a pre-owned Game of Thrones box sets giveaway? Probably not after watching season 8, but there you go. Schismatic says, positive notes. I already own the first 6 seasons, so I don't have to invest in any more Game of Thrones. What was the final shot of season 6? Can you kind of end it on season 6 and just say that it got cancelled? Which might be an actual more merciful ending than the actual finale that we got. David H says, why would you buy the box sets if you're never going to rewatch them? That's a very good question. If Game of Thrones had shaped up to being a very satisfying series, I love fantasy. Fantasy is my jam. It's my favorite genre. Lord of the Rings are my favorite movies, for God's sake. And I love the 4-disc fold-outs, the extended edition of Lord of the Rings. You fold it out, there's discs. You fold it out again, there's more discs. And you've got behind the scenes and you've got appendices and all this stuff. I love stuff like that. And Game of Thrones being the most prolific fantasy show in the history of television, I want to own that. I want to own them as a physical copy. And if it did amount to this great story, I probably would watch it again. I would turn people onto the show. I would show them Game of Thrones and go through it with them. But with the lackluster ending that we've got, what's the point of me owning season 8? Claudia says the rewatchability of this show has severely diminished with this season, and that's the problem. It's the hindsight we now have. I can't go back now. I wish I could go back to the innocent days of watching season 1, season 2, season 3, season 4, with that knowledge in my mind that it was still going to end epically, and still enjoy season 1. I can't do that now. I'll go back to season 1 and I won't be filled with a sense of joy or intrigue or sense of foreshadowing of how things were set up. I'm going to be filled with a sense of melancholy and what could have been and wasted potential and how far the series has fallen from grace. And that's a really, really sad feeling, Schismatic says, I will still buy the books, probably. If they come out, I will stick with the books, but I'm not getting my hopes up at this point. I mean, it's been 8 years, for God's sake, and since the last book. And apparently he's still nowhere near finished book 6. So I won't get my hopes up. I've invested so much time in this goddamn story. Imagine the poor people that have started reading these books since the 90s. Can you imagine what they're going through now? Schismatic says, though this season has dampened my enthusiasm even for the books because I'm kind of annoyed with George R.R. Martin. Do you think that George R.R. Martin should have sold the rights to his books to be made into a TV show if he hadn't finished the story? Or that he gave them the promise that he would finish his story by the time they caught up? Elizabeth says, me, long-time subscriber. Oh, Brinsley says you still didn't mention your thoughts on the Lord of the Rings TV show. Spill the beans. Okay, here we go. So Game of Thrones has made all the money, but what's very interesting now is that how poorly season 8 was received, specifically the finale. So they were banking on this being the huge thing, going out on a bang, everyone loving Game of Thrones. And let's be honest, everyone's still talking about it. I've been doing an hour and a half to 2 hour stream about it, for God's sake. Everyone in my my friends list on Facebook were messaging me left, right, and center. I had about 4 chats open at the bottom, all asking the same question. Chris, what did you think of Game of Thrones? Have you seen it yet? What did you think? This is a talked about show. This is the water cooler effect of Game of Thrones. It was a big show. Everyone watched the finale. but it's ended very anticlimactically. Now, they've commissioned, off the back of this thing, 5 prequel series, one of which is already in development. I believe it's called, well, I thought it was called The Long Night, but I believe it's got a different working title now. Naomi Watts from Peter Jackson's King Kong has signed up for it. I don't know if they've cast anyone else in it just yet. Will anyone care about Game of Thrones now? Based on the poor reception of this, if they bring out a prequel series, I'm guessing you're still going to get some people watching it or tuning into it or being curious and giving it a chance. But what's that going to do for fantasy in general? Because this was meant to go out on a high note. Amazon have spent the most amount of money to get the rights from the Tolkien estate, to get the rights to Lord of the Rings and all of its surrounded works. It's going to be set in the Second Age. It might even go into some Silmarillion stories, perhaps the fall of Numenor, or how the rings were crafted and things like that. There's a lot of potential there. But it clearly is done from a marketing standpoint now. And, I want to get excited. Middle-earth is my favorite legendarium. It's my favorite book series. It's my favorite films. It's my favorite world. I try and escape to there as much as I can. I love that shit, but I've seen how these things go. I've seen how The Hobbit's gone. I've seen how Game of Thrones gone and how easy it gets and how it all becomes about money and shock value, and the artistic integrity of the medium that they're adapting ceases to exist. Lord of the Rings was sacred to me, and this is the route that a lot of things are going. Nothing is sacred anymore. Whether it's a movie that's getting rebooted, remade, whatever it happens to be, a sequel that's set 30 years after the fact and it's terrible. It's all about money. Of course, it's all about money. But some of these older series like Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings, when that came out, they were made under different circumstances. They were made when companies would take a chance on a property. And look at where that gamble got them. One of the most well-respected, most accoladed trilogies of all time. Film series that still are near and dear to many people's hearts, still watch now and still have the same impact as when they did when they came out over 10 years ago. So, I don't know. I want to look forward to it. I want to look forward to that Lord of the Rings TV series from Amazon, and I'm going to keep an open mind. But it's not being filmed in New Zealand, which, I've got on record and said that maybe they can't film every location they need to in New Zealand, but it sounds like they're not even going back to New Zealand. The country that's, drafted in so much tourism from Lord of the Rings and put Middle-earth on the map. There was even the whole thing, and I don't know much about I know there's a video out there, Lindsay Ellis, where she deconstructs the Hobbit films, and in part 3 of her 3 video review series on the Hobbit trilogy, she talks about how there was this whole crisis of how, the companies in the studio, they didn't have to film in New Zealand. They could have just with the workers rebelling and everything like that, they could have just moved shop and filmed to any location on the map they wanted to. And, they're filming in Scotland. I don't know if they're filming in Iceland. I can't remember if they've mentioned that, but they're filming in Scotland, definitely. And probably some other places in Europe. They're not filming in New Zealand. This is going to sound like a bit egotistical here, but I met Alan Lee, who was one of the conceptual designers from Lord of the Rings. Amazing guy. He's really brought Middle-earth to life. How the weapons were designed, how things looked, objects looked, characters looked, sets, buildings, landscapes, everything. This guy did it all for the Lord of the Rings, along with sorry, I met John Howe. I met John Howe, not Alan Lee, but John Howe and Alan Lee were the 2 conceptual designers from Lord of the Rings that really brought the world of Tolkien to life. Even outside of the movies, they live and breathe Tolkien. And I met him at Wales Comic Con, and he's such a nice guy, and you can tell that he is so invested. He gets it. He is a Tolkien fan. I stood and had a 10-minute conversation with him about the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit films, and you could tell how he was really disenchanted with the Hobbit films, although he didn't outright say it. And the Silmarillion, for God's sake. And I asked him the question. I said, so, you probably can't tell me anything about this because it's probably kept all hush-hush, but are you working or have you been asked to work on the Amazon series, the Middle-earth, Lord of the Rings, whatever it happens to be, Silmarillion series by Amazon, which apparently is going into production very soon? And he seems like a very real guy. He doesn't seem like he's putting on any kind of front or any kind of act or anything like that. And John said, he went, I haven't had any calls yet, but, I'd love to work on it. I'd love to be a part of it. And right there, when he said that, that tells me that Amazon is not looking for the talent in this thing. Elizabeth taking off. Thank you so much for tuning in, Elizabeth. You've been an absolute trooper staying on for this thing. And yeah, I'll see you on the next stream, hopefully. But yeah, John said that he's not a part of it. And right there, when he said that, I thought, you know, they're not drafting in the talent. Why wouldn't you go back to John Howe and Alan Lee, who would, you know, I'm sure they would charge at the chance of being a part of a new Middle-earth franchise and, you know, designing more things, especially if it's surrounded by the Silmarillion. And they haven't asked them. And it's going into production real soon. So are we going to get that same level of love and craft and passion for the source material that we did with the Lord of the Rings back in, you know, the early 90s when they were filming that into the 2000s? Or is it going to be a very easy Game of Thrones style swords and sorcery series that's set in Middle-earth, and people are going to watch it, right? Because it's Lord of the Rings and Middle-earth, and that's what people know, and that's what people love, and it's going to bring in the big bucks. And then you're going to have 5 Game of Thrones prequel series, like the fantasy. It seems like they've cottoned onto a trend now. This is how everything starts. The Marvel movies, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Look at all the superhero films that have come out and TV shows. You've had Arrow, Flash, and they've built a cinematic universe. Not just superhero films, but you've also had other franchises trying to create a cinematic universe in the same vein as Marvel. If something's a success and is bringing in serious money, that starts a trend. Pop music, for God's sake. That's like the best example ever, like pop music. You get one solid hit and then you get about 100 other artists that bring a song that sounds exactly like it. And they keep churning that out until the money dries up, and then they'll move on to something else. And that's just the way of the world. Money, unfortunately, makes the world go round, and Game of Thrones was a huge cash cow. It was a niche thing when it came out. There really weren't any fantasy series out at the time like that. Since Lord of the Rings, nothing had really come out until Game of Thrones came out, and then you had the Hobbit films, obviously. And you saw how they were received. And now Game of Thrones has ended, and HBO need that money, and fantasy's popular. Amazon know this, so they get the rights to the Lord of the Rings. They get on that. You've got HBO cranking out more, and I'm sure you're going to get more fantasy series until people are bored of fantasy, and that's how it's going to go, I'm afraid. So, yeah, I'm going to round off now because, I mean, you guys have sat and listened to me prattle on for ages and ages and ages. I'm so sorry that I haven't been able to, like, get to everyone's comments and everything like that. So, yeah, that's Game of Thrones. I'm really sorry that this has been rambly and probably hasn't been as focused as it would have been with me and Tate and more of a discussion-based thing, but I'm so glad that we got so many people on this stream. Like, seriously, guys, like, you are the reason that we continue this channel. And I don't want to get, like, all soppy now or anything like that, and it's not to do with the alcohol. Seriously, like, seeing so many of you turn out for this thing, sit and listen to me prattle on for hours and hours and hours, talk about Game of Thrones and everything like that, pitch in with your comments. You guys have been awesome for the last 6 weeks, and not just the last 6 weeks. Like, some of you have been here for years. And hopefully my unintelligible ramblings have made some of you subscribe perhaps as well. Maybe some of you were just here for Game of Thrones content, and that's absolutely fine. Maybe some of you don't care about the trailer reactions or the movie reviews or anything like that. But at least you paid attention to this, right? At least there was something on the channel that you enjoyed. So, oh, thank you. Schismatic says it was very cathartic. Yeah, it was for me too. I feel like this was... You guys have all been a part. You guys have been my small council of therapists. And this has been therapy for all of us to express our love, our hate, our frustrations with Game of Thrones as a whole. And I feel better now. And I feel like a weight has been lifted. It's a shame how it's all turned out. But what's that saying? I can't remember the saying. Like, don't cry because it's over. Cry because it happened, or be grateful that it happened. I'm going to cry that it happened because it ended terribly. Maybe a 4th shot to sign off. Yes, right. I am going to sign off now. So thank you once again to everyone. You've been absolutely troopers. Thank you for joining me on this finale discussion right here. Bottoms up. I am not going to down the rest of this. What's coming up on next on the show? Well, I need to jump on a review for John Wick Chapter 3. I'm going to hopefully jump on that tomorrow. So if you're not already bored to tears by me right now, even if you haven't seen John Wick Chapter 3, jump on tomorrow and watch me talk about that. There have been a lot of trailers that have come out. There's been a Toy Story 4 trailer. There's been a new trailer for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is the new... Oh, JXC says take a fourth shot. I will get the fourth shot lined up for you right now, sir. So yeah, a bunch of trailer reactions that will be coming out as well. And then at the weekend, we are getting some serious movies coming out the rest of this month. We're getting Rocket Man, we're getting Godzilla 2, and we're getting Aladdin as well, which I'm going to have some very strong thoughts on, I could already tell. So here's to all you guys. Star Wars Daily has just tuned in. I'm really sorry, Star Wars Daily. We're wrapping up now, but in the name of you, Star Wars Daily, in the name of everyone that has joined me, and in the enduring memory, for better or worse, of Game of Thrones, salute. Oh, God. And that'll do it from me. So until next time, namaste. Thank you very much. And I'll see you guys on the next video. See ya.